Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Madam President of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, dear Saleh, Mr. President of Namibia, Madam Prime Minister of Tunisia, Madam Director General, dear Audrey, I am very happy, ministers, commissioner, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, to be with you here today. And I find that there is something very eloquent when we look at the stage we have here. Saleh cannot be with us physically today, and I know she's very sorry about this, but there are serious security matters and a terrible war underway in her country. But your three countries do not have an easy time of it. And you are three heads of state and government who are here together with the Director General in Paris to talk about education and to come and support this initiative. Aware of the fact that the challenges you face are extremely urgent ones, and they nonetheless involve remaining collectively involved in this battle, which is the battle for education. And that's also why I wanted so badly to be with you here today, Madam Director General, because the education of our children is, in fact, a sacred cause. And it was overturned, greatly disturbed by things happening in our times. First of all, the pandemic that you have all mentioned. At the worst period of the pandemic crisis that we're still undergoing, there were 1.5 billion young men and women who were deprived of schooling or of access to their universities. And there were even more in areas where there's poverty, where there are not digital resources, and where it's not possible to get to schools or high schools or universities, where there was no replacement possibility, no possibility of learning from home behind a screen. And today, and you remind us of this, Madam Director General, perhaps sustainably, 11 million girls who are not able to go back to school following COVID. And so the educational inequalities we had before the crisis have been made worse by the crisis, and our whole planet suddenly experienced a deprivation of liberty which was much greater for our young people and for our children, and prevented them from meeting other young people and from learning. But the pandemic would just be one thing limited in time, and we are collectively winning a victory over it because of our commitment, our science, our international solidarity. If schools and education were not always the first victims of dark forces. When terrorism attacks, it attacks schools, and France lived that in its own flesh and blood. We saw this with terrorist attacks in 2012. The first was a school to be attacked, and then just 1 year ago, Samuel Paty, a teacher, was murdered here in France. But throughout the world, whenever terrorism wins an inch, it's the school that is sacrificed first. And as you remembered, Madam Director General, what happened in Niger in the last few days, and I would like to also say some words of solidarity to all countries of the Sahel in particular, and those countries that are suffering from terrorism, which has led each and every time hundreds and thousands of schools in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and elsewhere to be closed. Each and every time we see the first victim of these movements are schools, are children who are sent into the darkness. They are young girls, even more than young boys, who are deprived of access to knowledge. The stakes we are playing for are these. Things that allow us to have access to opportunity, to knowledge, truly to build peace. That thing is education. It's school. And that's why the combats that we are collectively fighting are existential in nature for democracies and for cooperation between nations, for pacific, peaceful coexistence between nations. And that's been at the very heart of the French Republic. Let me welcome here the action undertaken by our Minister for National Education, Youth and Sports, and has been doing for almost 5 years now. Our republic has been built on schools, on knowledge, on its ability to let men and women who for a long time did not have access to education to do so, to create a union of pooled and common knowledge, trying to remain with open schools throughout the crisis. And France is one of the countries that kept its schools open the most, to have this awareness that there's an obligation of teaching beyond the age of 16, to have boarding schools for excellence, to double the number of classrooms. The obligations that we have had for the last 4.5 years and continue to have is to go on unhesitatingly with this work, fighting against darkness, and to have ever more equal opportunity, ever more confidence. And this is the battle that all countries are fighting. Not letting history stammer, we say. And as you recall us, Mr. President, let any child, whatever their background may be, to have access to responsibilities, to opportunities, on the basis only of their talent and their commitment, and not being determined by their family or by their social status. And that is why welcoming you to Paris today is something for us to be proud of, because I believe that Paris is the capital of education. Thanks to UNESCO, thanks to your work, Madam Director General, the work done by all of your teams, and that which was done during the crisis and well before the crisis, since the very beginning of your existence. UNESCO was at the heart of the coalition built during the pandemic to go on doing the essential work necessary in education, but also to create the link between education and culture, which plays an essential role in this combat. But also the presence of the OECD in Paris, an international organization which also plays an essential role for the sharing and evaluation of best practices in education. And also with World Office for Education, which chose 2 years ago to install part of its teams here in Paris to strengthen those teams. And then, of course, the Francophonie, which is also carrying out absolutely essential educational work on all continents to train and to help others to learn. The international work also done by the French Foreign Ministry and our network of schools. All of these things make Paris the epicenter of this fight for education, and a world capital for education, which is concentrating on the one hand on promoting the subject and putting, just as we are doing today, at the heart of the international agenda, and then also investing in training of teachers and trainers, an essential combat, because developing schools isn't just about building walls. It's also allowing us to have teachers trained in best practices, to make practices and content widely available internationally via our trainers, but also today with digital instruments and other online practices, to have independent evaluation of an open nature that is also transparent, and to allow best practices to be exchanged. All of these things UNESCO and the other partners I mentioned are doing here and elsewhere in the world, and are giving this fight, this comment, all its strength. And that's why we go on investing and consolidating in the work you are doing, supporting it in the years to come, because this is an essential combat. And here I'd also like to support, in my turn, the Paris Declaration, which represents an indispensable step forward, making schools the most important place for building a shared project, a shared future for our societies, and making schools a victory of the lights of science over all forms of darkness. UNESCO's figures, I think, are very elegant in a cruel way about this. Many member states have less than 1% of their recovery plans throughout the world earmarked for education. And so to this end, I think the imperatives of the Paris Declaration represent, to my way of thinking, something truly categorical. earmarking at least 4 to 5% of the GDP to education, have a bigger share of national recovery plans for education, increase the volume, the foreseeable nature, and the continuous nature of international aid to education so as to create a right to quality education for all children and to consider education is a public good. So behind these principles, we see realities. We see budget commitments and clear choices that have to be made in each of our countries, but also better to structure our public aid to development and our solidarity investments. And this is why, beginning in 2018, we increased our participation in the World Partnership for Education, which we confirmed once again for the period 2021-2025, of over 300 million euros. And this is also why France has made a commitment for the World Food Programme, for an initiative for meals in schools and allowing meals to be served to our children in schools throughout the world. And that's why we'll go above and beyond the Paris Declaration, supporting all of the schools involved so as to make education the very heart of our policy. Because this is how we help citizens. This is how we create equality between men and women. And this is also how we sustainably build economic opportunity in the future of our societies. This Paris Declaration is, to my way of thinking, the very basis of all the future initiatives that we are going to have to go on building. Our planet is mobilizing. Late, it's true, and imperfectly, it's true, for the climate right now in Glasgow. But the fight for education is a fight which is just as important. Because without it, science will fall backwards. Obscurantism will increase. School and science will allow us to see how we can deal with climate change, confidence in vaccines and the way we fight against epidemics, that these things prosper. And if we want to have societies which are still societies of progress, that decide to cooperate, which put intelligence in the service of the common good, we need to make the fight for education a stronger fight. We need, throughout the world, to build an agenda for education, which is a true investment agenda in humans, because that is the basis for everything else. It is the base without which the investments we make in climate and health or other worldwide goods will simply crumble or fall apart. Let the forces of darkness prevail. All of those who are trying once again to make our societies go backward. And that's why I wanted to be with you today, because this Paris Declaration, for me, is the very basis of effective multilateralism and of the things we are committed to. It is the basis of what we will be called upon to build in months and years to come. In a few years, France will take the few months will take the chair of the presidency of the European Union, and this is going to be at the very center of our agenda. We'll build a new partnership with Africa. And I've put that already at the very heart of the French presidency of the EU. And this new deal, which we decided to build with our African partners, will have a strong educational component. How can we accept today that the World Bank or the IMF, in our own rules of cooperation, that we see the same figures? The same financial grammar that we had before the pandemic, where all of our countries have adapted themselves. How can we accept that we request the same limits or constraints on countries that are spending 20 or 30% on their own security? What are they meant to be sacrificing? The education of their children? We will never be able to rebuild in an equitable way unless we are able to make true choices and to have investment in education placed in the very center of our new partnership. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I wanted to share with you today, coming to support both your work and your commitment. What we are building now is a new pact between generations, which at the same time is a pact for justice between different regions of our planet. And I think that this combat, this fight, is at the heart of your organization. UNESCO, which has this, is the conscience of the United Nations. The UNESCO, which is the result of fights carried out by eminent French politicians and thinkers, and I hope not to hurt anyone when I say that in a couple of days UNESCO will have its 75th birthday, and I hope that the fight that you have today will be in the heart of your history and also of all of the future combats that UNESCO will be called upon to lead. Thank you all very much for the work you do, and thank you for the work to come.